Okay, Hotep family. Back. Hotep family, my name is Brother Ray Ray. Today is January the 12th. Wednesday. February the 12th, Wednesday. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Africans Helping Africans lecture series. We meet here in honor of William Mackey, Amos Wilson, Louis Ray Rivera, and I forgot Gil Noble, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Serti, Haj Malik El-Shabazz, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune, big Cadillacs, chicken dinners, to tell the truth, sacrifice. They could have made a lot of money. They could have been like Skip Gates.
That's right.
And they chose not to.
That's correct.
We also thank the people like Dr. Lewis, Brother Mike Graves, and all of y'all who come here and sacrifice to give history. You know, that's what we thank. Now, we're going to bring it over. Bring it over to the Amos collection. This is the Amos collection. Blueprint for Black Power. Off the presser. Brand new. Sababa finished it. The brains behind Amos. The psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat towards reclamation of the African mind. We have a couple of copies here. If you want straight off the presser, all the proceeds go back into Africans Helping Africans, so we can keep the organization going. Also, the falsification of African consciousness. Classics. The developmental psychology of the black child. African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. Awakening the natural genius of black children. Issues of manhood in black and white. And in honor of Louis Ray Rivera, we have Jazz in Jail. Excellent. Black on black violence, because a lot of people has a problem and always want to know what's the problem with black folks killing black folks. When you go to Germany right now, Germans killing Germans. You go to China, Chinese killing Chinese. All over the world, their own people killing their own people. Earl Ponder, revealing the unspeakable Bible verses, the truth about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Holy Trinity. This brother passed away, and Sababa had a whole bunch of his books. So I said I'll bring some here, and it's right here. And we also have Palestine, Apartheid, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, those are my books.
Oh,
yeah. But they for sale. I was selling.
Now, on Tuesday, at 5 o'clock, on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, we have Brother Mike Graves.
That's right.
Noel Leader, Julian Harper. Community Cop program comes on 5 o'clock. 5 to 5:30. Irritated Genie was excellent yesterday.
That's right.
And it's on YouTube. You tune in to www. On your computer, on your phone, and you can get it. It's the hottest show in New York. Also, on Saturdays, while everybody is shaking and baking, wheeling and dealing, moving and grooving.
Not everybody.
You have Blog Talk Radio.
How you doing?
Blog Talk Radio with Sister Empress Chi. It comes on at 10:30. You go into your computer, and you go into Blog Talk, and you scroll down Empress Chi, and from 10:30 to sometime 12:30, 1 o'clock, they be on and you could call in. All of the MOVE people is out of jail.
That's right.
Talking about long distance runners. They have paid the price.
That's right.
So they're going to be having a great big...
There's one left though.
No,
All of them.
We paid the price.
The one left is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Oh, right.
We paid the price.
They're going to have a little thing for them, and we're gonna try to go down there and support them. We have been down there a few times,
Yes, sir.
and we'll be letting you know. So, the lecturer is gonna come on and speak from 8 o'clock to maybe 9 or 5 after 9. 5 after 9, we're gonna have a slight recess. We're gonna do a collection, and we have some refreshments in the side room over there. The men's and the women's bathroom is to the left. And then from about 9:05 to 9:15, or 9:20, give or take, we're gonna come back with question and answer. You can ask the speaker whatever, and he could go into his lecture to about 10 minutes after 10, because we have to get him back to where he's going in Jersey. So you ask what you want, and he'll continue with his lecture. February, we're kicking off at Africans Helping Africans. If you want to see the other episodes of Africans Helping Africans with Dr. Lewis and Brother Mike, you log on to Africans Helping Africans on YouTube, and it'll come up. Everything will be transferred onto YouTube in the future. And I have Dr. Lewis and Mike Graves, Africa on the Move, and we have Dr. Lewis, Africa on the Move, and Dr. Lewis and Mike Graves, the other tapes we have here, if you want. Please get the book, Self-Hatred, and support Brother Amos. And all this is for Mackie, and all this is for us. And this is what we're here for organization and provide information. Because as Doc always says, once you put it on YouTube, the whole world watches it. So in other words, what Mike Graves says, what Dr. Lewis, what Brother Truss, and Brother Truss has excellent Friday in Newark. If you want information from him, you can see him during the break, and he'll let you know all the information about his study group. And if you think you know how to study, you don't know how to study until you get with Truss. And you find out you've been doing everything too fast. So without further ado, I want to thank everybody for coming and supporting. This is our Black History Month kickoff.
That's right.
YouTube,
Yes,
no matter what they say, the whole world watches it. And contradicts everything. So without further ado, kicking off Black History Month, we're going to give you noted scholar and professor from Newark, New Jersey, Brother Truss Graham of African Lecture.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. I appreciate that. First, in true African tradition and custom, it's important that before I speak that I ask my elders to have that opportunity, because without them, there is no me. Do I have that? Thank you, Mr. Brown. And okay, we call you Junior Elder. But that's only respect, reverence, and honor to tradition, and we have to maintain that tradition in order to have a sense of values and, you know, a sense of ethics and morality. Because a lot of times what happens is that we get caught up into this social system that we find ourselves in and get indoctrinated by a lot of nonsense. So it's important that we maintain those particulars. I want to thank, you know, African Helping Africans as well as the Dr. Mackie group for having me here. This is, you know, actually, how can I say, like a revisit. You know, it's like a coming home. You know, it's always been, I mean, you know, Professor Mackie, you know, always, like Professor Simmons and Dr. Clark and those individuals were always special people to me. Because those personal individuals that I just named were really book people. And I've been in the book business for 40 years. And I mean really book people. I mean, when I say really book people, I'm talking about names, dates, places, and they all know their material like the back of their hand. You know, I used to always run into Dr. Mackey down at Strands when we'd be carrying our bags of books, you know, or, you know, and a lot of that is a tradition that developed out of the black community. Whether you know it or not, the first black bookstores that we had in New York City were in Harlem. George Young was one of the first major black bookstores. This is before the bookstore that most of y'all might be familiar with, and that's the Frederick Douglass bookstore that was set up by Richard B. Moore. And Richard B. Moore, as you know, was one of the movers and shakers of the Harlem Renaissance period that literally brought about change in regard to what and how we became and defined ourselves. So much so that they used a term during that time called the New Negro. And that term was developed and shipped and given credit to a guy by the name of Alain Locke. Alain Locke was given that credit. But he's not the individual who started that. The individual who started the New Negro movement is this gentleman right here. He's probably the baddest intellectual that ever existed during that period of time. And during that time, he was one of the individuals that literally was called the scholar's scholar. He was called the Black Socrates of Harlem.
Yes,
he was so bad that W.E.B. Du Bois said that he was the most intellectual of all intellectuals he ever met. Here was a guy who could read 5 books a night. Wow. This is how bad he was.
Go ahead, talk about it.
This was one of the baddest individuals that you could imagine. He was an autodidact. That means he was a self-taught individual. Wow. And he was black as midnight. That's Hubert Henry Harrison.
Yes, sir.
This is one of the greatest intellectuals. This is the guy that taught, literally taught, John G. Jackson. This is the individual who taught Benjamin Quarles. This is the individual who taught John Henry Clark. John Henry Clark got information from the Harlem Y. You remember that, Dr. Lewis, the Harlem Y, during that particular time in the early days. And John Jackson used to go in Harlem and sit on the street corners at 134th Street and Lenox Avenue and listen to this man talk. He was the guy that started street corner speaking in Harlem.
That's right.
Y'all, I'm talking about sitting on the stove box on a ladder and getting up there and talking about every subject matter under the sun. He was so serious about this. There's an article in the New York Times, 1921 article, in regard to him, galvanized 11,000 individuals, 11,000 on a street corner under J.P. Morgan's office. They couldn't believe it. The police had to come down and rope off the area. He's the only black man that got his face on a science magazine in Germany. Wow. In Germany, he spoke on every subject matter from the human evolution to gynecology to he was a theater critic for the New York Times at 24. Wow. He was a bad brother. And you know who destroyed him?
No people. Go ahead, brother.
Booker T.
Washington? Go ahead, brother.
Why?
Go ahead, brother. Wow.
See, you have to take into consideration, sometimes we have to look at self and have a more examination of who we are before we start realizing and pointing fingers at what we assume the enemy is, when sometimes the enemy is ourselves.
That's right. True that, true that.
So what I want to do this evening is that I want to share with you some information that I have amassed. It's a small amount. Those that know me from the book business, as well as being the right-hand man to Professor George E. Simmons. George E. Simmons was the right-hand man to Dr. Yosef Ben Yekinen. And for a lot of the books that Dr. Ben wrote, Professor Simmons was, you know, right there in the process of helping to amass that information and did a lot of proofreading for the accuracy of the material. And because of that, he was able to set up an organization at the behest of an institution that developed in Harlem called First World Alliance. First World Alliance was this particular institution that literally was a grassroots collegiate experience. in such a way where that we had access to individuals of renowned caliber, people that we talk about in renowned stature. At that time, we could go and talk to these individuals. I remember in the days we used to go to First World, and you ain't seen a camera. All we had was cassette tapes.
That's
Remember
right.
that, Minister
Lined
Brown?
up.
Just cassette tapes lined up on the front of the podium, just sitting waiting for Dr. Ben or Dr. Clark or Ivan Van Sertima or Amos Wilson, Dr. Jeffries to come and to depart that gracious information that they was giving us. And because of that, it become so contagious. It become like a disease in regard to that. And this was in, the late 70s, early 80s. And my first contact through that was through a lecture that Dr. Ben had gave in Rutgers University in Newark. And when I was introduced to that, I was just floored about all of the material that he was dispensing with a degree of mastery that I just couldn't understand. He was just naming dates, people, places, things, events, just like, he was drawing books off a shelf. That's how, how available the information was to him. And after a while, I began to realize, after listening for a while, that it wasn't something that, it wasn't a talent. It was something that he developed over years and years and years of research and study. And when I began to look at that, I said, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be like that. I want to know. I want to find out. Because there's not enough not just to know. But the most important thing Professor Simmons told me was to understand what you know. Because if you don't understand what you know, you're just a book. Anybody, here's a question. Is knowledge power?
Yes.
Yes, or there.
It is not. Knowledge is not power.
Knowledge is wisdom.
No.
Knowledge is wisdom.
Let me finish. Knowledge, when not applied, can do nothing.
That's right.
Go ahead, brother.
Knowledge, when applied, is
Potential
powerful.
power.
That's right.
That's right.
It's powerful. But see, this is how cliches, we pick up information, we run with them, and we really never examine them.
Go ahead, brother.
You see? So this is what we do with history. We do it a lot with history. So a lot of times when we literally are trying to dispense what we assume is history, a lot of it do it based on hearsay. So all of the information, 99% of what you have in your head right now, you got it.
His story.
That's right.
His story.
But
not yours.
even in your story, I'm saying is that in your story, the information that is transmitted a great deal of time is not transmitted accurately. The issue is not whether the individual is black or white giving you the information. The information, the issue is the information accurate?
Yes.
Who cares whether you're white? I don't care. If it's right, it's right.
That's right.
All you got to do is go to any of them scholars that I just named, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, and the most things that you learn first in the study of history is, where did they get their information from? So if you go to Dr. Ben's book and look in the bibliography, you're going to find out there's a lot of white guys there.
Yeah.
Why? They did because of, at that time, in the area of research and study, they were the individuals who had the opportunity to do the research and study.
That's right.
Whether we like it or not, that just happens to be the politics of the day. But that don't make it the only way, but that just happens to be the way the situation was set up. So we have to go behind them. I'm talking about Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. Go behind them white boys. The Henry Breasteds and the Philander Petries and, all of the, Arthur Schlesingers of the world and the, H.G. Wells and all of these individuals. These are all of the prominent white scholars, the Toynbees of the world, and go back and re-decipher the material. Because if they're going to be able to right the wrongs of history, then they have to understand what the history is.
Calls for critical thinking.
That's exactly right, my brother. 100% critical thinking.
And you gotta look at who perspective they're looking at.
So when we realize the significance of what it is, we don't get caught into the cliche. We can understand it and we can benefit from it, but that don't mean that we do not use it without understanding the significance about it. So let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Anybody ever heard of this word here?
Nubia,
Right.
of course.
Right. Now, what do you think that word means? What does the word
Nubian
Nubia?
brothers from South Africa.
Nubian.
It's under Egypt, and it came from the gold the Egypt deposited to make them a historic landmark.
Say that again, my brother.
Nubians were the people below Egypt. They came, they mined the gold, they manufactured Egypt.
How do you know that?
That's just from my knowledge from history.
Now, see again, this is why I say history is important.
You got
The first thing Professor Timmons tell me is, if you're going to be able to impart information, you got to first know where it came from, who gave it to you, the year that material was produced, who published that material, and most of all, the material of its circulation. So in this case, if we're talking about Nubia, the first thing if I wanted to find out about Nubia, what was the first thing I would want to find out?
Where's it from?
Wait a minute, go ahead.
Landmass.
Landmass would be good, but the first thing that I would want to find out, the very first,
Definition.
say that again?
The definition of the word.
The definition of the word, there you go.
Yeah.
So the definition,
of the word.
that's right, the definition of the word. So the first thing is we want to find the definition of the word. In order to do that, we have to do what first?
Like find out what language it comes from.
There it is, what language it comes from. So what language does this come from?
That's the question.
Anybody know? What language does this word come from?
Humanity.
Say that again?
Humanity.
No, not even close. No.
Non-English.
English is not a language.
No. Now the reason that I'm going through this is because I want you to understand that sometimes we take on things we really don't know, even though we assume that the people that gave it to us is giving it to us with an intent of being accurate about the material. And a lot of times they don't do it intentionally. They intentionally say, I'm going to try to deceive you. No, they basing the information based on how they got it and where they got it from. Just to give you a good example, years ago, my mother told me, she said, if you get a burn, take some butter and put it on it. Y'all probably heard it. Right. So one day I was in a cafeteria, had just came from shop class, metal shop, and I had a spark from the metal shop, hit me on the hand, burned my hand. So when I got in the cafeteria, them little pats they put on the little thing when you get in there, little pat of butter. So I'm putting it in, I'm standing there, and I'm taking the butter and I'm putting it on my arm. So the guy who's the teacher, that's the head of the cafeteria for that day, is a chemistry teacher. So he looked at me, he said, Grant, what you doing? I said, man, I got burnt in the shop class, so my mother told me if I put butter on it, it'll soothe the pain. So he said, what class do I teach? I said, chemistry. He said, chemistry say grease and heat don't go together.
Gotta cool it down first.
That's exactly, well, not even that. That's the only thing you got to do. And then the major thing is to take the burn, the object is to stop the deterioration of the tissues. So what you want to do is you want to do that, as Dr. Lewis know, you either put a cold compress on it, some ice, some water, something of that particular nature. But definitely not no butter. Right. Now, hold on. Now, if the issue was, if you get a burn and you take a stick of butter that's unwrapped out of the refrigerator while it's cold and put it on it, we good.
Okay.
Because we using it in the same compress that we would use any ice pack. Right. That's right. But the object is just that you don't want to put grease on that. You see? But that's not the baddest part. After I found that out, I went back home and told my mother what the chemistry teacher said. And my mother said, well, you know, I only told you because somebody told me. You know what I'm saying? Now, as that went on, we never did it again, but it was a lesson learned. You know what I'm saying? So in this case, Nubia comes from a particular language.
Is it Sudanese?
Is it Sudanese? No, of course not.
Okay.
Right. And the reason, the significance of language is always based on the people who, so if the people that this name come from didn't call themselves that means it come from somewhere else.
Absolutely.
So this word right here, first of all, it was not named by the people from which it gives its name to. Yes, sir.
Say Greek.
That's not Greek either. Now we would use the term that this actually word comes from the root word. It comes from this root word, N-U-B, nub. It's a root word for an Egyptian word that means gold.
There's no such word in Egyptian.
Huh?
Kemet?
No. Well, Kemet, you can say Kemet, Egyptian, whatever. You know, it's an issue of semantics based on how we are defining the material, but we know and understand. Even Kemet is not a term that Egyptians use. Y'all do know that, right?
No.
We know it now.
Oh, well, let me explain that to you.
Go ahead, brother.
First of all, the language of ancient Egyptian that we use today is not the language that was spoken in ancient Egypt. Why? Because we don't know the sound values of the language in which it was spoken. The reason at that, because those languages had no vowels. Now, the language that we pronounce today, when you say the word Kemet, you use the word Kemet in ancient Egypt is spelled like this.
Okay, I know it.
That's Kemet.
Right.
It's actually, if I pronounce it, it would be K-M-T. K-M-T. But we don't pronounce words like that based on what we would call vowels, consonants running into consonants. So what we do is we put a vowel in between, either O or E or U or W or whatever. So in ancient Egyptian, the earliest the earliest scholars of linguistics like Jean Pillon, Thomas Young, and those individuals, they decided to use what they call the universal vowels. And these universal vowels was either E, O, or U. So in this case, they use E's. That's where you get the word Kemet from. It does not exist. You can't go back in ancient Egypt and that's the word you're going to see. Just like you can't go back in ancient Egypt and see no Nubians. That don't exist. There's no term for it. Now, what I want somebody to do, I want somebody to help me get this lecture. And okay, who can read? I want somebody who can read. Somebody got that? Come up, my brother. I can read it myself, but I want somebody.
Go ahead, brother.
This way you can get it understood. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to read the first paragraph. Now, I'm going to explain something to you.
I can read, but I can't see.
No.
Now, in true African tradition, you never ever give information to an individual without source. So what I want you to do is I want you to tell them what the title of this book is. I want you to tell them who wrote this book. I want you to look in the index and find out when this book was written.
Wow, that's
Okay.
a lot.
Now, that's not a lot. That's important. Go
What's
ahead.
up, family? My name is Hassan Bilal. Okay, the name of this book is The Nubian Museum.
That's correct.
The book was written by the it was written by Professor Dr. G.A. Gabala.
That's
And
correct.
he's the Secretary General of SCA.
Which is in the Sudan.
Okay, the book was printed in
Hold on, it's right here.
Listings for credit in
They don't have it on this particular copy, but it's in the 1979. But go ahead.
So the book was printed in 1989.
79.
79, excuse me. I'm going to read from the preface. So the area now called Nubia extends along the Nile from Aswan south to the town of Dabud, near the Fourth Cataract, linking Egypt, i.e. the northern part of the Nile Valley, to the Sudan in the south. The name of Nubia is first mentioned in Strabo's Geographica. The Greek author is believed to have visited Egypt circa 29 BC. The etymology of the name Nubia is uncertain.
Stop. What is the word etymology?
It means the word.
Where it comes from.
The origin of the
The
word.
big, the origin.
Not the origin of a word. Let me explain it to you, and I want y'all to listen carefully. It's the origin of the study of the root of a word in a particular language. It's important to say it like that, because if you say it's the origin of the study of a word, which is not true, because the issue about the origin of a word has a very long history, and I'll explain to you why. Because what came first, oral history or written history? And what was we doing the longest? So that means that oral history had been in existence for hundreds, if not thousands of years before we wrote a word.
That's right.
So that means that terms and concepts could have went through evolutionary changes over many times before they were ever written down.
Yes.
You get it?
Yes.
So that's why it's important to say the origin of the root of the study of a word in a particular language, because that language defines at what time they acquired that. That's important. Language always determines, and when we're dealing with history, time and geography. So if I said he was born in Ghana, and what was the people of the land of Ghana? What was the name of the people in the land of ancient Ghana?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Because it's moved.
That's what
So where it was to where it
what's
is.
the name of the people that's in Ghana today? What's the major group? Ashanti. Now I asked this to a Ghanaian from Ghana. I said, what's the name of ancient Ghana people? He said Ashanti. Soninke, of course. In other words, ancient Ghana is not modern Ghana.
Right.
Ancient Ghana was 600 miles northwest, in between Mali and Mauritania.
That's right.
That people that lived in that area were called Soninke people, and they spoke Soninke. They didn't speak Ga, they didn't speak Tree, they didn't speak Ashanti, none of that. The Ashantis came in the 19th century. You know what the Ashantis are? They're a confederation of a variety of tribes put together. So when we think of ancient Ghana versus thinking of modern Ghana, there's two different things, two different places, two different extremes. But you got individuals who have no relationship with time and geography, much less understand the evolutionary process in regard to these civilizations and these particular places. They assume that it was all the same. And it's the same thing about this. We cannot assume that everything that we assume, that we actually hear is legitimate. So this word that we use today called Kemet, that literally derived from pronunciations that they acquired from Coptic Christianity. Why did that? Because when they broke the Rosetta Stone, the Rosetta Stone is written in how many languages? Anybody know? Anybody know of the Rosetta Stone? Huh?
30, about 33. The first one?
13.
Say that again?
13.
No, not even close. The Rosetta Stone is written in how many languages?
3.
He said 3. Anybody ever seen the stone?
Yeah.
You seen it? Let me explain it to you. It's not written in 3 languages. It's written in 2 languages, but it's written in 3 scripts. The top script is Meduneta, or what we will call ancient, what they call pictograph. The middle language is called Hieratic. That was the language specifically that most of the priests used, and you could see it written in somewhat a cursive kind of writing. The third writing is written in Greek. The reason that is because the Coptics, remember how the Coptics got to be Coptic. The Coptics got to be Coptic specifically because when the Christians came in to came into Egypt, who was running Egypt? When Christianity came into Egypt, who was running Egypt?
Rome.
Arabs?
The Greek.
Say that again?
No, Rome, the Greek. Alexander the Greek.
That's right. That man is correct.
That's right.
Remember, the Greeks ruled Egypt from 332 to 30 BC. They moved from Alexander to Cleopatra. 300 years.
Right.
Prior to that, the Persians came in 525 and they ruled. Egypt was dead and gone for a long time. When we start talking about guys like Manetho and all them, these are individuals after periods of invasion and control. The only reason you remember Cleopatra is because of two major feats. Where's Cleopatra born? Anybody know?
Iraq.
No, sir.
No, she was born in Greece. She's Macedonian.
If she was born in Greece, she couldn't be a Macedonian because she would have been born in Macedonia.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, that's not true either. I gotcha! I like that. But listen to this. Cleopatra was a Macedonian. Both of her parents were from Macedonia, but she was born in Egypt. Minister Brown, if you take a German Shepherd,
And put him in the oven.
and then, no, not that. If you take a German Shepherd, I know, you know it down there, but if you take a German Shepherd to China, and that's right, and that German Shepherd give puppies, do we call it a German Shepherd Chinese puppy?
Yes.
He said, yeah. Listen, it's going to be a German Shepherd, nowhere to go.
But she spoke the language and understood the culture.
Yeah,
so
but
she was a foreigner, but I'm just saying she knew the language, the culture, the philosophy.
Yeah, but the issue is that the significance of that is the reason why we give her so much claim. See, we give her claim and we say that she was African. There's a lot of individuals say that she was African.
Right.
Now, the reason that came to play was not because she was an African by pedigree. She was African because two things. One, out of all of the individuals that sat on the Greek throne, from Alexander and all of the Ptolemies, all the way down to Cleopatra, not one of them ever spoke Egyptian language, not one.
Right, she did.
She did. Not one of those individuals ever at no time engaged in the religious, construct and institution of ancient Egypt. She did.
Right.
Isn't that?
And they loved her for that.
Wouldn't that be considered a misnomer to call from the latitude and whatnot as where the so-called Egypt is? Before that word Egypt was based on the continent of so-called Africa.
Yeah, but all of those terms are terms that were made up based on political issues at specific
Well, I
times.
thought the group was down with lineage.
If you have a place,
Lineage, like my grandfather, this and that. If my son, his son, and his son, I thought Cleopatra came from that.
Well, not altogether, but the issue again is that it's just showing you the pedigree of these individuals and the significance of that influence and how we acquire what we acquire as Egyptian culture. Remember, most of what we got, we had to rely on individuals who wasn't a part of that environment to decipher and interpret what it was.
Who came for chicken on
So when we look at the language, when I first started studying this, I studied with Professor Simmons by way of Dr. Bennett. But Dr. Bennett and them didn't deal with language. That wasn't their cup of tea. The person that I studied this with was a sister by the name of Rickety Ahmed. Rickety is probably one of the best in the business, only second to probably somebody like TFL Obenga. These are pure linguists. You know, TFL Obenga speak about 10 languages fluently. Read and write, Egyptian, this is a guy that speaks ancient Greek and modern Greek. This is this phenomenal kind of, you know, development. When you talk about Shaka Anta Diop and his relationship with studying the relationship between ancient Egyptian language and Wolof, that actually wasn't him per se, that was TFLO's material. Here was a guy that is far beyond what we could imagine, and we should take him a bit more seriously because of what his contribution is. When they first gave me the book Stolen Legacy, all I could think of was Greek stealing Egyptian history. That's all I could think of until they opened that damn book. They opened up that book, that shit was Chinese to me. Because I didn't understand nothing about what the hell I was reading, not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Anybody in here ever read Stolen Legacy?
I did, yes.
Right. Do you understand what you read?
Some of it I didn't know.
Most of us did.
No.
Because we had no clue. The book was way over our head. And that's the problem with a lot of the material that we were introduced with, was that we wasn't introduced with it on a level where that we were able to what? Digest it. And then we didn't have individuals that held our hand and guided us along the way when we were introduced with this kind of information. It's not a game. See, Black history is not a holiday.
Cipher.
Don't get this twisted. This is a way of life. This is your culture. This is something that you see and do daily. When you look in the mirror, when you get up out the bed, when you talk to your children, when you hug your wife, all of that is a part of this.
Watch out for the knife.
But what we do is we think that it's some idle relationship with something from the past. Real history goes on as we talk right now. Yes, sir.
Did the Persians speak Greek? I mean, Egyptian?
Did they? No. Of course not. Enemies don't do that. Most enemies, when they come in, they want you to do what? That's right. They want you to speak. But see, the biggest problem with the Greeks was they were so outmatched with intellectualism. The first thing that Alexander did when he got into Egypt, he looked around and he knew the reputation of Egypt. That shit was all over the world. So the first thing he did when he got to Egypt, he went to the priest and said, "Make me God."
Yeah.
Make me God.
And burn down the library.
He didn't burn down no library.
Huh? He didn't?
No, sir.
Nobody burned
See, this is a lot of nonsense that we got. He burned down the library. Napoleon shot off noses. Didn't happen.
What?
What I'm saying is that this is why I say we go by hearsay. We don't go and check it out. Dr. Ben used to say, don't listen to me in no damn lecture. You better go check what I say. The object of a lecture is to provide you with bits and pieces of information that will spark you to do research. This whole culture is about research and study. Me, I don't worry
You sound
about
like Dr.
African
Lewis.
history, and I worry about the mechanics of research and study and making sure that what I get and what I disseminate is accurate. Because I got a reputation to keep up with all of these individuals. They set a standard.
That's right.
And that standard represents a degree of accuracy, and we cannot belittle it for anybody.
Maybe.
The level of ethics and morality has to be steeped in that very nature of accuracy.
Yes, sir.
This month is very, very special to me. It's not like I said, it's not a holiday. Two major events in this month. Why I have such great respect for it. One is because it's my birthday.
Happy birthday! It's your mother's birthday.
No.
It's your
Let me
birthday.
explain it to you. There's only one birthday. The rest of them are birth dates.
Right,
You only get to be born once.
that's right.
That's
How you
it.
spell birth?
B-R-E-A-T-A? Huh? Are you sure
But
about
anyway,
that?
the second major special thing for this month is that I had this great affinity for Malcolm X.
Go ahead, man.
And those that know me, I did a little research in that area.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just
Yes,
a little
sir.
research in that area. And I guess y'all do know that they got a new documentary, a miniseries out on Netflix. You know.
Did you bring your tapes on?
No, but this is what I was going to do. This is what I'm going to do. So since I'm coming for another series, my next lecture is going to be on the assassination of Malcolm. We're going to deal with a little bit on that subject matter, specifically because, see, I was born February 21st, 1956. Malcolm X was killed on February 21st, 1965. And it gave me this kind of, how can I say, like some hidden hand,
Epiphany.
you know, carrying me along to do the particular research. And one reason is because, you know, in my household, you know, we had a very deep experience with religion. I grew up in early days as a Catholic, you know, in Catholicism. I was an altar boy in the church.
Wow,
And at that time, you said the Mass was in Latin.
that's right.
Now ask me what I said. I don't know what the hell I said.
That's right.
But anyway, that was part of the liturgy.
Yes.
That was part of the liturgy of the religious, but you have to study the liturgy of performing these particular rites inside the Catholic Church. And again, I was good at that. And then eventually my mother began to branch out. And eventually she became a member of the Nation of Islam. And we were exposed to that whole particular experience. And one of the things that I began to realize is that, you know, how disciplined the organization was, the attitude, but most of all, this re-insurgent for identity. You know, because remember, the Nation of Islam and black organizations in those particular days, their major concern was redefining us as a people.
Yes.
Because we've been oppressed and beat down,
That's right.
you know, in regard to who we were and what we represented. And it was a time for somebody to come and erase all of that nonsense. So one of the key factors of how that began to take place is when the Great Migration took place, when a lot of individuals from the South began to move to the North. And this was passed after the period of 1865, Reconstruction, and then eventually Jim Crow. That particular period represented a period of, one, asserting ourselves, them 10 years, 1867 to 1877, as Mike would know. Mike is one of the best historians on American history. I mean, bruh, y'all need to let him get busy. But in that area, that particular period of time was a period of assertion. When we talk about the developments that black people had as a community, a lot of it was because of forced situations. So black churches, black institutions, you know, Black Wall Street. It wasn't because they wanted to, it's because they had to. That's different in regard to now. If you set up a Wall Street now, that's different. Because it's because we want to, not because we have to. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And what destroyed it? Most of the people that say, if they ask you, what destroyed black baseball, they say integration.
Yep. Absolutely.
They tell you that real fast. What these
Absolutely.
books, and remember, when I show you the green book, this green book represents not just drop-off points in regard to Africans from the north going to the south. It represents an industry,
Yes, sir.
a financial industry
That's right.
that literally was the underpinning to be able to supply the needs and concerns of Africans that were traveling from the north to the south.
That's right.
And integration destroyed it. Wiped it out. Now you Negroes is fighting over chicken sandwiches at Popeyes.
That's right. That's right.
Serious. It don't make sense. But let's flip it back. Nubia. Nubia is an Egyptian word. So what that means is it's foreign to the people from which it named. Get up again, my brother. Now he's got that piece that he's getting ready to read now is going to define that.
Wait, you said it was an Egyptian.
Listen, hold on. Listen. He's going to show you the significance of the relationship of the term based on the source from which it came. Always remember this. Just because you black don't mean you family.
That's right. That's right.
Clarence Thomas. Remember, we stopped off on the word etymology. Remember that. Go ahead.
The etymology of the name Nubia is uncertain.
Huh. The first is, if a linguist say that the etymology of a word is uncertain, that means they really don't know where it came from. So what that means is that the individuals who check the origin pertaining to the linguistic aspects, because one thing we know for sure, that the ancient people who lived in Nubia didn't speak Egyptian. They spoke a language called Maoretic. Maoretic. The only individual that I know that's been in the forefront of leading research in the study of the linguistic breaking of the code of the linguistic language of Nubians, so-called Nubians was TFL Obenga. And he'll tell you that today, the language is still not broken. So that means that whatever we know about Nubians didn't come from Nubians. Let's say this again. Everything we know about Nubians didn't come from Nubians. It came from individuals outside of Nubia. This is not unique to Nubia or Africa. You ever heard of a word called, heard of a group of people called Minoans? Minoans.
We knowing too much.
Minoans are called the precursors. You have Minoans and Mycenaeans. Minoans and Mycenaeans are the precursors to the Greek civilization. Before there were Greeks in that area, that land, there were Mycenaeans and Minoans. They were the people that were before the Greeks. So when you think of Greek language, the language itself is not indigenous to Greece. That language has its base in Phoenicia. The word phoneme, phonetic, alphabet, that's all Phoenician. And those are the individuals who actually, literally, set the foundation for the language that we today call Greek. Go look it up. The language is called Linear A and Linear B. It's ancient language.
What about Phrygia?
Phrygia is same, never mind. Phrygia is a part of Greece, that whole particular scenario of events. But it's not on that same level in regard to these. Remember, the Greek civilization didn't start in Greece. It started in Crete. All those islands off the coast, Samos, Ionia, all of those areas. They were city, that's why they call them city-states. They wasn't one particular group of people. They were a variety of peoples, and they never all got along. They fought like crazy dogs. That's what white people do. They fight a lot.
Socrates come from?
They violent. They just are. But excuse me before, go ahead.
Okay. It's uncertain, but some researchers believe it is derived from the ancient Egyptian Nibu,
Nibu.
meaning gold,
That's right. And
referring to the gold mines for which Nubia was famous.
now, hold on. It says Nibu, which means gold, which is an Egyptian word. So in other words, the word that we acquired, that we use for the name of a people, was based on a resource that the Kemites were extracting from their land. See, when we see Egypt, a lot of us see Egypt in this grandiose idea of all of these great accomplishments and things and assume that they did it all. They did not. Half of the stuff that they are credited for came from somewhere the hell else. Wasn't no gold in Egypt. Nowhere. The largest repository of anything in Egypt is rock and sand. That's it.
That's what rock and
For
roll
real.
No, I'm thinking you've been there, right, brother?
I've been there.
Minister Brown?
I've been there.
You've been there. Rock and sand, as far as you can see. Rock and sand, they got a lot of it. But the first thing you do when you go in south, all of the things that were sought after and deemed precious in ancient Egypt, a lot of them. Ostrich feathers, leopard skins. All of these things came from somewhere the hell else. Why do you think Hatshepsut became such a great, accomplished king, queen? Because she literally raised the coffers of Egypt. That means she went around the world doing trade with individuals on levels that they couldn't even imagine. It made Egypt so rich, it made Kemet so rich that her own consort, her own brother, her own husband got jealous. He got jealous. And remember, she actually was ruling as, you know, as a consort to him until he got old enough to rule, because he was a young kid when he came to power. And what happened is that she ran it as a surrogate until he was old enough. And then when he got old enough and see all of the accomplishments she got, he was like, damn, what the hell am I gonna do? What's the first thing he did? He went around Egypt and started erasing her name off the monuments. White boys didn't do that.
What?
See, we got to realize some of the infighting that went on that was part of the decentralization, the literally breakdown of our own particular civilization. Most great civilizations are not destroyed externally, they're destroyed internally.
Right.
They implode, they don't explode. So in this case, this is one of the things that we had. So now we get this word Nubia, we find out that the word is Egyptian, we look at all of the material pertaining to ancient Nubia and we find out that it's an Egyptian narrative of a Nubian story. The guy who did the most research in the area of Nubia was a white boy by the name of George A. Reisner. George A. Reisner. George A. You remember we took, when I got this magazine, me and Professor Simmons, we took 2 busloads and 2 vans up to Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and we did the first exhibit that the Boston Museum of Fine Arts had on a Nubian exhibit. And they had the material in that museum ever since the late 40s and never produced a smidgen of it. And when it first came out, me and Professor Simmons went up there and we blew that place apart. The white man came to us, he said, look, he said, we have 8 Jewish people, Asian people, all these people following us and going through the whole freaking week. But what happened is that the Nubian exhibit was downstairs because it was the new exhibit, and the regular Egyptian exhibit was upstairs. So when I was downstairs, Professor Simmons would go upstairs. When he was upstairs, I would come downstairs. And as we talking all this, we see this crowd and everybody's coming, and then all of a sudden, I see this woman come walking, and who is it? Walking through the crowd, Shashi McIntyre. She like, I want to see what the commotion was. Who over here? She said, I look, it's Professor Simmons. She said, y'all got this place over here rocking. What's going on? And we was giving them their first introduction to real Nubian, because up until that time, Dr. Ben literally was taking ancient Egypt and he was squashing it in your head like, you gonna get this. And then once you really got a lot, you know, when you really started getting it and everything, he said, oh, it ain't Egypt. It ain't about Egypt.
Now, was that the Reisner that was giving out the PhDs?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
George A. Reisner is the curator of the Boston Museum of Foreign Arts, and he is the premier Egyptologist for Harvard University. See, most of the excavations that took place in the early days in Egypt and a lot of these other places around the world were major universities. Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, Princeton University, all of these big jokers that had loot that was going over there doing one thing. Stealing! They were stealing you could not even imagine.
He's the one that refused Dr. Hansberry, right?
I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
The issue was George A. Reisner was this premier individual, but he was a racist to the core. He was the individual that when he seen premier images of black individuals, he said that couldn't have been black people. No, that's what he said.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Even today, the white scholars that came behind him said, well, he had this really problem of bias. I said, yo, he was a racist joker. Stop that.
That's right.
I mean, really racist.
That's right.
When he seen this picture, this one right here, when they first dug it up and he seen it, and the guy said, well, it looked African, it looked black to me. And the guy, and George A. Reisner said, no, it was just dull instruments that they used.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead, brother.
Dull instruments.
Go ahead, brother.
Let me share something with you real quick in regard to that. See that? What does he look? What kind of where do you think that person is from?
It's a Euro.
He said it's a Euro. Why do you think he's a Euro?
Because of the hair and the nose and the chin.
So he thinks that those characteristics define you as a Euro. Think about that, Dr. Lewis. Think about that.
Let me see.
Now, Dr. Lewis also knows that there's a thing called phenotype. There's no phenotype on this face of the planet Earth that didn't come from black people first.
That's right.
That means that any look that there is on the face of the planet Earth, it was black first.
That's right.
I don't care if it's straight hair, kinky hair,
Absolutely.
I don't care if it's an alkaline nose, I don't care if it's big lips, wiggly ears, I don't care what it is.
Absolutely.
Africans had it first.
That's right.
Now, see this picture right here? This picture right here. If you jumped on a plane right now, he would tell you, if you jump on a plane right now and landed in Somalia, you can see a joker look just like this. With the features just like this. Only difference, he'd be black as Dr. Lewis Cohen.
I agree.
See, we got this idea that when we think of features of a black person, he got a bad wide nose like this and big lips like.
Kinky hair.
You know what? Because we caught in the same stereotype that they gave us. We caught into that to assume that there's one phenotype for Africans. Remember, every people on the face of the planet Earth is a direct result of you. That's right. So that means that the phenotype that they eventually acquire is something that they went through that Africans went through a process for them to receive. Anybody that knows science knows that.
Biology.
Well, even in biology, the issue again is like, in our community, like I'm telling you about Nubia, I tell you about the study of human evolution. And in the study of human evolution, a lot of times it's not just about knowing having a grasp of some idea of the material, but also these things change. See, science changed quick. Today it could be this and tomorrow it could be something completely different. So if you ain't on this, if you really ain't on it, they'll make you look like a fool in 5 minutes. So if I ask y'all right now, if I said to anybody, and y'all can come off the top of your head and what you'll know, anybody know the oldest remains in the world? The oldest human remains in the world.
Would that be Lucy?
Who said, he said Lucy. How many think about that? Lucy?
Jack Nash.
No, it's older.
One before that, one before that.
He said one before that.
Goes back about 6 million
Now,
years.
this is what I'm going to explain to you. Professor Simmons always tells me. Whenever somebody asks you a question, there's no half answers. You either know it or you don't. And one thing is, all intelligent people, the first thing they know how to do real easy is say, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. But most of us, what we try to do is answer something that we know we're not familiar with. To seem important. To seem as if though we know. Instead of just waiting for the person that's going to tell you. Now, let's look at this. It's almost coming up time. Now, let's look at this. Lucy. Let's talk about that.
That's the girl I used to go with.
Let's talk about that. First of all, Lucy is a derogatory term that is used. That's first of all. We use it because it's euphemism, and that's the term that has been literally thrown around. But Lucy is very, very old news. Do y'all know who found Lucy? Anybody ever heard of what biological categorization that Lucy is in?
Yeah, she's the first Homo sapien.
She's not even no way, she ain't no Homo sapien.
She like in the age.
Anybody familiar with a Homo sapien, what it is?
Yes.
Anybody know the difference between a Homo sapien and Lucy? What's Lucy?
I gave.
Australopithecus.
That's correct.
What?
Lucy is called an Australopithecine. It's like what they call, the term is southern ape-like man.
So in between the Neanderthal.
No,
No,
don't get it mixed up.
Neanderthal is totally different.
Yeah. See, this is what I'm saying is that before we start dealing and trying to share and circulate our history, we've got to know it first. And it seems as if though most of us, and I know this from the internet a lot, it's just like
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you enjoyed the refreshments. If any of the books you want, it's all help Africans, helping Africans for refreshments and to speak and everything. With that, we're going to bring Trust back all the way to about 10 or 10 minutes after 10. So this is the second half, and thank you for enjoying the refreshments. Go on.
Now, this is just to add to the material and in regard to the discussion. And like I said, African history is not just African history, it's about history. And it's about knowing where you at in time and place. So I'm going to share with some of these, if y'all would. These are called time charts. I created this because most black people don't know how to read time. You know? Well, you got one. Now, those that, hold on now, those that didn't get one, you're going to have to share with somebody, or
Might get one so we can make copies.
or you can buy a copy. I have laminated ones for $5. As you can see with my organizational logo on the back and all of the material on the front. Now, what that material shows you is that this is what is called the time chart. And a time chart literally shows you where you are in time and space. As a matter of fact, these are 2 presents for the elders. One for you and one for Dr.
I'm not elder.
You see that?
Me too.
When you finish, I'll take it. Don't even try that now. These are serious individuals. Now, but be it as it may, if you look at the time chart, you'll find out that, do me a favor, let me just wreck till I finish. Now, if you do me some justice and you look at the time chart, you'll find out that time is broken down. Everybody know, y'all heard of time before, right? Y'all know what time is. Do y'all know what time is? Yeah, let's look at it. Now, this is time.
BC.
Okay, now, anybody, y'all familiar with this, right?
Yes.
Okay. You have 2 acronyms on both sides. This one means what? Anybody know?
After death.
After death. Okay.
After
Hold on. The man said after death. We're going to go with after death for right now. It means after death.
Right there.
Okay? Now, anybody know what this side means?
Before Christ?
Before
Somebody
you
say
come,
before
Christ?
before you came.
Christ. Now, the first thing is, who said after death?
I know.
You did.
Right.
Now, hold on. What book did you get that out of?
I ain't getting out no book. That's
Okay,
book.
hey,
I guess the Bible.
say that again?
It's
Wait
not.
a minute. You used a term before that. You said I.
Guess. I
Right.
guess. Right.
Right. So that means you're not sure.
I'm not sure.
And you definitely didn't get it out the Bible.
Right.
Now, but this is the definition that he gives us. And the young lady over there, she said that BC meant before Christ. Now, let's look at this. If you look at that time chart, and you look at the top of the first number on the left-hand side, what does it say? Huh?
Oh, before Christ.
Right. And what does it say underneath that?
Before this common era.
Right. Now, the reason, and if you go further down, it says what?
Before the president.
That's correct.
Before the president.
Which is BP versus BCE. Right? And then after that, it has what? That's right. And what does it say for AD, my brother?
Anno Domini.
Anno Domini. So let's look at that. This word here does not mean after death.
At death.
And one reason it can't mean after death, because the term is in reference to a personal figure. Who's the figure?
Christ.
Christ. So according to the story, how long did Christ live?
33 years.
33 years. So that would be from what to what? From what?
OBC to
OBC. What the hell is OBC?
33 BC to 100. 33 BC 100.
He said 33 BC. Come on now. Look. Remember, this is time. This is AD, this is BC. We trying to figure out the definition of the acronyms in regard to time. We're talking about the figure, the personality that this acronym is secured to is Jesus Christ. And we saying that based on that story that you get in the Bible. Now remember this. Remember, be careful, remember. Everything you read in the Bible is not history.
Right.
That's not true.
Some of it is history, but everything is not history. Second is, you better find out what is and what isn't. Because you will go around assuming that something in history where it did not take place. But this is a story about a personality that didn't even live. We don't have any evidence. There's no evidence for any personality named Jesus the Christ in existence, flesh and bones. There's no evidence for it. Y'all do know what evidence is. What's the difference between evidence and facts? Y'all ever heard this term, alternative facts? Y'all remember that, right?
Facts have been proven.
Y'all laughing, but let me explain something to you. The reason that is because most of us don't know the difference between evidence and facts.
Facts have been
Well,
proven.
they say a lie is just as good as the truth if you get somebody to believe it.
Well, again, that's one thing. Evidence and facts. Anybody know the
To the
difference?
facts
Go
be
ahead.
proven.
Hold on. Go ahead.
A fact can be one thing today and it can change tomorrow. Evidence remains the same. This evidence never changes.
Exactly correct. Let me explain it to you. And don't have nobody trying to prove otherwise. You can go to books and they're going to tell you everything. But evidence are the material remains of something or an event. Let me say that again. Evidence are the material remains of something or an event. This is material. This is material. You know? Material. An event. Something took place. That is evidence. Facts. Listen to this. Facts are the interpretation of that evidence.
Right.
Correct. No.
Facts are the interpretation of that evidence.
Which
Which can change. Now, as Mike would tell you, that let's say an accident took place. There was an accident outside. And the police drive up, and they see a few people standing around. They say, oh, he was in the accident, this was there, he seen what happened, so and so. So the first thing the police do is, he's looking at the evidence first, and then he's going to interview the individuals who were involved in the incident. Now, preferably, what he tries to do is individually interview them, because he don't want to interview them in a group, because he don't want somebody else's interview to contaminate somebody else's. So the issue here is that he's acquiring information to literally shore up the relationship to what the facts is showing. I mean, the evidence is showing him, because the evidence is the car, the screeching lines in the street, you know, who got hit, you know, all of those. That's the evidence. And then what the police does is he brings all of that together and he writes what is called a report. Now that report is going to become the facts of the event. The only problem is that it only becomes a fact if everybody began to, as the brother said, agree with what the outcome is. But if he take them facts into a court and somebody challenges those facts, which is the defense's scientific analysis that what that police say is out the box. The first thing he's going to say, are you a police officer? He say, yeah. He said, how long you been a police officer? He say, about 4 years. He said, 4 years. He said, okay. Right. So he say, when the defense bring that guy up, they say, oh, this is Mr. Bloomberg. Mr. Bloomberg been a scientist for 47 years. And the only thing he worked on is accidents and how they happen. That's all he works on. So he goes and he investigates the situation and he said, what the police say is not happening. He said that this car did that, this car did that. He said the science doesn't say that. He said the science says that based on the science, the trajectory of the car, how many fast they was going, this, that, and the other, this comes up to so and so, so. Listen, that's what it all comes down to. And most of the time, real good court cases come up to my scientist against yours. But what it comes down to is two major things. Let me explain to you. A court is not about justice. Don't ever get that twisted. A court is about law. It says a court of law, not a court of justice.
Right.
They are there to literally administrate the law.
Or obfuscate.
Now, I had an opportunity in my life that was a little different than a lot of other people. Me, I grew up in a household with police. Because my old man was a police for 37 years.
You didn't run from it, did you?
Didn't have to. And let me explain explain something to you. My father used to always tell me, he say, son, there's two kinds of police officers. There's a law enforcement officer and there's a peace officer.
Amen. That's right.
He said a peace officer is a person who knows and understands the clientele he's working with. He's literally like a psychologist. He knows folks. He can go in, communicate. He can de-escalate a situation. He can just, and not even think about
Using his gun.
at no time.
That's right.
He said, and then there's these guys called law enforcement officers. They only worried about the law. Everything else sorted out by somebody else.
Correct.
So their position is that if they see you violate anything that they feel, or if they want to just create something, they have the option to do so. So one of the things I found out early, and my father was real serious about this, and that's how to deal with white police. And the first thing he said is, never try to intimidate them. He said, because the end result could be your demise.
Correct.
He said, you don't have to be weak. He said, but you also have to understand who's in charge in the situation. Because it's about survival at that time. It's not really about, I'm right, you wrong. Don't worry about that. Right now, it's about survival. So you are trying to survive. So all of the things that you do, you have to maintain a certain. Now let me just say this. And this is to everybody here, and Mike knows. Just because you do the right thing, don't mean you're going to survive.
That's right.
That's correct. But it helps to put things at least in your favor. But what happens is that we get caught into that situation and we end up not responding in the correct way, and it escalates the situation. Our major concern is try to de-escalate. So the first thing you know, there's a difference if a guy is talking to you and he got his hand on the gun. There's a difference between if a guy got a gun at you like this, and you talking about, I ain't do nothing wrong. You just shut up.
Just take the candy bar.
Just shut the hell up. Don't intimidate the dude, because he already trigger happy as it is.
That's right.
See, sometimes what we do is instigate the situation by trying to assume that we trying to show that I'm not wrong. That's not the issue here.
I'm not a punk.
Right, and that too. It's not about that. It's about survival again. But let's go back to the time chart. The time chart is talking about AD and BC. So we're talking about 1 AD. This is 1 AD, and Jesus lived from 1 to what? 33. 33. 1 to 33. Okay?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
he lived from 1 to 33, right? And this, my brother over there said that this meant after death. So if I said 25 AD, does this apply to that if it means that?
58.
Huh?
58.
No. I thought
Say that
AD.
again?
20, 33 plus 25. He died at 33.
Yeah, no, I'm saying is that if I said 25 AD, would that mean that after death would apply to 25 AD?
No.
No, because he ain't dead. He would be still living.
Right.
Right, so AD can apply, can't be used even as an acronym to define this period of time. The actual definition is a Latin term, which means Anno Domini. Anno Domini means, in Latin, the year of our Lord. And they're talking about the time in which this starts. Now, the difference between AD and BC is, anybody know? What's the difference between AD and BC? Numerically.
It goes reverse.
That's right, it goes reverse. So the first century in BC starts when? When does the first century in BC start? How can it start at 1 if it goes backwards?
Oh, yeah, it'll be a lot of number.
100.
It would be 100. A century is how many numbers? 100. So the first century in AD would be 1 to what? 1 to 100, right? Right. The second century starts when? When does it say? If this is the first century from 1 to 100. The second century starts when?
101.
101, right. And it goes from 101 to what? Say that again?
200.
200. And then the third century starts when?
201.
201. Now, if you notice something, I said the third century and it starts 2. I said the second century and it starts 1. If you notice that this is the 21st century, but it's 2-0. How did that happen? Jesus. Said Jesus. Water the wine. The reason that is because on the AD side, the numbers that you use before you get to that 100 number or to that century is from 1 digits. You got 1 to 9; those are single digits, and then from 10 to 100. 10 to 99 are double digits. You don't actually get 3 digits that we're familiar with when we use the term hundreds until you get to the end of the century. So when we get to the second century and it starts 101, that's where you get the lagging. But on the other side, it's just the opposite. It would be from 100 to what? 1. I had a tell me, when did the calendar start? He said it's 0 years. I said, 0 years? What the hell is 0? How do you get to a 0 year? There's no zeros in the calendar. Only time you have zeros is when you're dealing with what we would call the difference between a century and a hundreds. Centuries and a hundred. Y'all do know the difference between the 17th century and the 1700s.
Right.
17th century, 1700s. That's where this comes in. This lagging comes in.
Right.
So the 17th century begins when, Mike?
1600.
Nuh-uh.
1601.
Okay. Right. Always remember this. Anytime you say a century, it's always a 1 in the beginning.
Right.
Anytime you say hundreds, it's always a 0. So if I say 1700, it's going to be 1700. That's the 1700s. So if I say the 17th century, it's going to be 1601
Right.
to what?